What's up, everyone? Jason Gilbo here, taking a look at tonight's 8-game NBA slate, breaking down value, injuries, and some rotational news. Jumping right into it here, Orlando Magic taking on Charlotte Hornets, 206 total. Hornets are about 8-point favorites in this one. As far as the Orlando side, Vucevic still questionable for tonight's game. We would see Bismack Biyombo come in a pretty decent spot. Charlotte's been pretty bad against centers this season. They're a middle-of-the-road rebounding team. Biyombo will come in and see sizable minutes once again. As far as usage goes around, I do like Fournier if Vucevic is out. Peyton at a $7K price tag now on both sides after back-to-back triple-doubles. Still a tournament guy only for me. I'm not jumping on and just saying he's going to be, here on out, better the rest of the way. Terrence Ross still on FanDuel 4,500. I don't mind using him there. And Aaron Gordon's still a viable option. So despite a 99 team total there for Orlando, I still think they're pretty viable just because, one, they do have some cheaper price tags. I mean, Peyton's your most expensive now in that starting lineup. So as far as guys off the bench, I don't really have anyone there. I think they're a decent cash game team to target. Their floor is relatively decent. So keep a note on the Vucevic. That was certainly heightened the guys around him. As far as Charlotte goes, 107 total. I do like the backcourt as always. Kemba Walker is a little bit pricey, playing really well of late. I don't mind using him in all formats. Nicholas Batum as well. He was questionable heading in, but it looks like he's going to be fine. He's probable now for tonight's game. A decent spot against Orlando as well. A lot of the usage does shift to those guys. As far as the front court goes, I think there are better options on this slate. You do have Marvin Williams, who's had a couple of decent games of late. Cody Zeller as well. I probably won't be going anyone there. Golden State, Minnesota, next one here, 213. Minnesota playing really well defensively of late. So that is one thing to note. You look at Golden State, 109 total here on the road. This one certainly could be fun for fantasy production. I don't mind using Curry, Thompson, just because their usage is sky high without Kevin Durant on the floor. Draymond Green's a little bit pricier than I like because power forward's, mediocre. I don't mind using him. I do think Iguodala comes in and plays a better performance than he did the last game out against Boston. I don't mind using him, more of a GPP guy, just because he has been really boom or bust since Durant went down. But I'm pretty much focusing on the usage in the backcourt. Like Klay Thompson, Steph Curry as well. Curry's a little bit pricier than I like him to be. I do think he's more viable on DraftKings, where he's only 9,900. So that is one thing to note about the pricing difference there. Outside of that, though, Warriors are kind of in a funk right now. We haven't really seen a lot of great fantasy productive games outside of Curry, really, against the Knicks. Thompson had a decent game as well. So, we thought maybe they become must plays and start to build around them a lot more. That really hasn't been the case. So, do note that. As far as Minnesota goes, you can certainly look to pay up for Towns and GPPs. Outside of that, though, Ricky Rubio playing really well. Price is starting to come up a little bit more than I'd like it to be. Andrew Wiggins' price is coming down a little bit more. I am somewhat intrigued in Wiggins in a tournament aspect because I do think Minnesota comes out and plays well tonight. I more of a kind of a game correlation type move. Even though there are better small forwards, in the price range, I think Wilson Chandler and Chris Middleton are obviously going to try a lot of ownership. So, I think he's just more of a pivot in that one. As far as value guys go, there really isn't anything that I'm looking at off the bench. You look at Tibbs, he's always going to be a guy who plays his minutes rather high for the starters. So, Indiana, Milwaukee, this one should be a fun one. I do like guys in this one quite a bit. 101 total there for Indiana. Miles Turner, good GPP play at 5,400. Obviously, just because Milwaukee does struggle against opposing bigs. Turner, always a guy with some block upside. One thing that is a concern, he is on the road. Has played a little bit better at home, averaging 7 more fantasy points. So that's disappointing. Hasn't rebounded actually all that well against Milwaukee, which is weird given the fact that they ranked 23rd in rebound differential. But at this price tag, I don't mind taking a shot at him in tournaments because he does have reasonable upside. Even a cheap center number 2 on DraftKings as well. On FanDuel 6,300, just GPPs for me. Jeff Teague on the cheaper side. You look at Milwaukee. I mean, middle of the road against point guards of late. I don't mind, using Teague. It's just a matter of him, will we get that big game or are we going to get that kind of mediocre game, which we've seen him kind of produce every now and then. But I think he's going to come in a little bit lower owned, especially coming off of a down game against Detroit where he was in a good spot. This is a guy who usually hovers around 30 fantasy points, so I don't mind that. Indiana's in a decent spot. Same with Paul George, who I think is going to garnish lower ownership as well. In a good spot against Milwaukee. They do struggle against small forwards. Indiana's just one of those teams where, if they're on, all three guys are going to certainly be producing. If they're not, it's just going to be kind of average performances. But I don't think anyone's, floor is rather low in this type of matchup. And on the Milwaukee side of things, I mean, Giannis and GPPs. But Chris Middleton, I mean, great cash in GPP guy, even at the heightened price tag. This guy's coming in and produced really well, averaging 19, 4, and 5 over the last 5 games, playing right around 30 minutes per game. So he's back up to his usual ways. Been really consistent in shooting the ball well. We didn't really see a big drop-off coming back from the injury. So I like Middleton a lot, like him in all formats. The only other guy here really to mention is Greg Monroe. Always a GPP guy just because he plays an adjacent kid front court. On the cheaper side, only 5,800 on DraftKings, over his last 5 games, averaging 13 and 5. This is a guy who I do like in this one, has really crushed Indy in this one in 2 games. I mean, averaging 16, 12, and 5 in 25 minutes per game in 2. So definitely has their number, which isn't surprising given the fact that, they're not a good rebounding team as well. They rank 27th. They do struggle against bigs as well. Still, Monroe certainly could be in there, especially for his size aspect. Toronto and Atlanta next here. Just a 202 total. I mean, outside of a couple of the later games, it is hovering around this range for a couple of them. Toronto, the only guys I'm really particularly looking at is Corey Joseph in a cash game value sense. Jokic Dennis Schroeder, one of the poor defensive guys. Obviously, he wouldn't move off of Joseph. So Joseph's in a decent spot. Probably doesn't have a ton of upside, but cash games, he's certainly going to be viable just because he is still cheap and the mids are still going to be there. DeRozan's a little bit more expensive than I'd like him on this type of slate. You can look his way if you don't want to pay up for a Harden or Giannis. I'm okay with that, but probably just more of a GPP move, hoping that he can match and hoping the other two, do have down games because there is still a sizable price difference between them. Outside of that, though, I mean, Toronto's not really on my radar tonight with one of the lower totals, especially with a lot of low usage guys. I mean, Valanciunas popped off, but he's been very unreliable. I'm kind of off of him still. As far as Atlanta goes, I mean, you can look at Schroeder, who's playing really well of late. Price is up more than I'd like it to be, though, which I feel like I've said that quite a bit here. But I don't mind using him in tournaments. I also don't mind using Millsap and Howard, especially on DraftKings where their prices are, rather low. And even Howard, I mean, on DK, 6,900, not a bad price tag. Millsap 7.4. Guys are playing really well, high floor type of guys right now, so I don't mind them. Toronto's front court really doesn't scare me right now. Atlanta at home, 102 total, so they're certainly in play. As far as other guys here, I mean, Tim Hardaway Jr. is probably the only one of the guards/forwards that I would use right now because, one, he's on the cheaper side, still sub 6K, playing really well, shooting really well off the bench. If he's going to continue to come on and get, 28, 30 minutes and produce about 25 to 30 fantasy points each night, I mean, he's in a viable spot to do that. So, I think with Lowry gone, it does hurt their defense a little bit more than usual. So I don't mind using him tonight. He's always in a solid spot. Next one here, Houston and Chicago, and we get to Houston with a monster 115 total. Chicago also up as well, 109 total. And this one, obviously 224 next to the Nuggets and Celtics. This is going to be one of the games to really target tonight. So I don't mind using guys here. Obviously, Harden comes in. You want to look at him. But even the guards here, I mean, Patrick Beverley's played really well of late. I don't mind him tonight. I think he's kind of sneaky, playing really well, averaging 8, 7, and 3, 2.2 steals per game over the last 5. We thought maybe his minutes would take a little bit of a hit, but he's been above 30. His only down game was against Utah, which is always understandable against opponent of Utah. But other than that, been really consistent. So I don't mind Beverly, especially on DraftKings where he's shooting guard eligible as well. As far as other ones in this game, I mean, if Ryan Anderson's out, we didn't see a ton of elite production open up. The only thing that we could say is Gordon did play 39 minutes in that one. So that is one thing to note. It didn't, it took him 40 minutes basically to get to value, but, I don't mind him. It's a much easier matchup against Chicago. So if that's the case again, I don't mind using him. Clint Capella's been a tough guy to figure out of late, still on the cheaper side. But you know what? Playing really well over his last 3 games. The minutes are finally starting to trend back up, 32, 25, 29, 26. This is all after basically playing 19, 16, 18, about a week and a half ago. So minutes start to be looking pretty well. He did put up 14-9 against Chicago earlier this season. Still on the cheaper side, 5,200 on DraftKings. On FanDuel, he is only 5,300. So, I mean, you can certainly look and use him tonight. I think he's a solid value center in a decent spot. Outside of that, I mean, Lou Williams off the bench, still seeing tremendous usage. It's just a matter of if he gets hot or not. I'm probably looking more GPPs with him. I am looking at other ranges. He did play 22 minutes last time out, but he basically needs to just absolutely go off. His shooting's not been good. Over the last 5 games, he's only shooting about 30% from the field, which is troubling for a guy who absolutely needs to score. So Williams, probably I need to see a game first before I get back on the wagon there. As far as the bull side of things, Dwayne Wade looking to be back tonight. That chucks down Butler's usage a little bit more. I do like Wade in GPPs. I think, one, coming off the injury, decent spot here against Houston. Not a good team that, defends shooting guards. Looking at what they, bottom 5 in fantasy points allowed. So, I don't mind Wade in a GPP, especially if you're banking on this one to stay close. As far as Butler's price, I think it's a little bit too high for me, especially with the other small forwards on this range. It's just more of a game, stack type of option with Butler. But if you're really stacking this game, obviously you're getting hard and it's just way too expensive. So as far as the other guys go, I mean, you're looking at Mirotic, who, didn't even play. You've seen Joffrey Laverne come in and see a little bit bigger minutes of late. If that's the case, I mean, played 28 minutes, he's a viable GPP shot, 7, 8, and 4. We've seen this guy be, fantasy relevant when given the minutes before. So, in a decent spot against Houston, they haven't really played well against opposing bigs this season as well. And with that total, Chicago up from their season norm, I don't mind going that route and tossing him in a GPP at that minute. So it looks like Mirotic is out of the rotation. Can't really rely on Bobby Portis as well. So I'll certainly actually be looking his way tonight. Boston, Denver, my favorite game on the night, 223 total. And on the Boston side, I don't mind some of these guys here. Avery Bradley played 30 minutes against Golden State. If that's going to be the case tonight, usually we've gotten a pretty good update on Bradley's minutes before the game. Denver allows the second most fantasy points to opposing shooting guards. Really cheap. I mean, below 6K. This is a guy who was upper 6s for most of the season before getting injured. So I'll be taking advantage of the price drop. Definitely using him on FanDuel. I mean, 5,500, you certainly can, plug him in all formats, especially with that total. Isaiah Thomas, still a little bit pricier for me. Really good spot tonight. 8,700 is not that bad on DraftKings. I certainly don't mind him there. Scored 30 real points last time out against Denver. Shooting 9 of 17 from the field. The only problem is he didn't have a ton of peripheral stats that go with it. But he is, about a $1,300 difference from Curry, certainly cheaper than Wallet Harden, a little bit pricier than Kemba Walker, but I do think he sits in mid-range where you can actually target him tonight. I don't think he's all that expensive in comparison to those guys. The same goes for on FanDuel. I mean, he's about $1,000 cheaper than those guys as well. So if you do want a discount, since there's not a ton of great cheap point guards that I like in GPPs, I can certainly see spending up at that position tonight. As far as the other guys, Al Horford, I'm not really on. I'd rather use guys like Clint Capella or Greg Monroe, who do have, higher GPP upside. That's about it for me. Crowder kind of gets a knock. I'm much more intrigued with the Denver side of things. Especially with the injury concerns. Jokic did not practice on Thursday. Gallinari went through a partial practice for whatever that means. Gallinari probably has a better chance of playing if he did actually get some practice in. Jokic probably not, but we'll see how that goes. If Jokic is out, obviously Mason Plumlee would be a solid value and a popular value play even in tournaments and cash games. If Jokic plays, you can certainly look his way because he's, immensely could be a top scorer on any given slate. Wilson Chandler remains an option for me at the small forward spot with Kenneth Faried doubtful for tonight's game. Good spot for him. Boston, not a good rebounding team. Denver, one of the best rebounding teams in the league. As far as the backcourt goes, usually like looking at point guards against the Celtics. Jameer Nelson trending downwards. It's been Jamal Murray who's been playing up a bit. And with that being said, I mean, Murray's in play as far as the stars and scrubs approach goes. Did play 30 minutes for Nelson, played pretty well. But other than that, I mean, he's actually been producing in about 22 to 25 minutes. And I do think he can get that in tonight's matchup. And especially with that total, I'm willing to take a shot on it. You look 24, 18, 26, and 30 minutes. That 30 minutes did come when Nelson was out. Has scored 29, 7, 26, and 24, and 20 over the last 5 games as far as DK points go. I don't mind tossing him in tonight. I think he's a cheap value. And with Nelson kind of unproducing, Malone has said that he wants to get Murray more minutes, so you can certainly look his way and toss him into a couple GPP lineups and hoping that he can kind of release some salary for you. So, but overall, Gary Harris, I'm off of tonight. I think they're better shooting guard options and better spots. Likely going to draw some Avery Bradley, Marcus Smart as well. So that doesn't really set up an ideal situation for him. Chandler, Jokic, if he plays, Plumlee, if Jokic is out, is the moves that I'll be making. Brooklyn, Dallas here, 212, and the only injury really in this one is Brook Lopez. Hamilton's going to come in, draw a start against a bad rebounding team in Dallas. It is a punt play. I mean, he's decent on the fantasy points per minute front. If you're going stars and scrubs, I certainly don't mind him if you're going multiple lineups. Jeremy Lin as well, in a decent spot. Dallas isn't a great defensive team. It's just more their pace. Brooklyn does have 100 team total tonight, so it's not bad. But Jeremy Lin playing really well of late. I don't mind using him in cash games, averaging 15, 3, and 3 over the last 5 games. Playing, more minutes of late, 25, 24, and 22. With that being said, he scored 30 DraftKings points in 2 of the last 3. The turnovers have kind of hurt him a little bit more on DraftKings or on FanDuel. It makes him drop down a little bit more, so it doesn't look as appealing. But he has been playing well, and this is a decent spot. As far as that goes, I'm not really on any secondary players for Brooklyn. On Dallas, I mean, everyone's in play here, really. Wouldn't even be surprised to see some guys take some rest, like a Nowitzki as well. But getting a good matchup here, 111 total for Dallas, up a lot more than their season norm. Seth Curry, Wes Matthews in that backcourt certainly playable at the shooting guard positions. Just a matter if you want to save the extra 1,000 to Matthews. I don't mind him. Yogi Ferrell getting a nice narrative game against a team that cut him in Brooklyn. Cheap, obviously a great matchup as Brooklyn allows the most fantasy points per game to opposing point guards. Harrison Barnes, the only one off my radar because there are better, higher usage small forwards to use tonight. Dirk Nowitzki, always in play for me, playing really well of late, obviously coming off of, a game where, he went and got out what he needed to do, hit 30K fantasy or real points in his career. Like him in this one, playing about 27 minutes per game, averaging 14 and 10. Won't be surprised to see him actually maybe cool off a little bit as far as minutes if Dallas does have this one in hand, so do note that. Last game of the night here, Washington and Sacramento. Washington 110 total, Sacramento 102. A little blowout concern, but I don't usually worry about them on the road here all that much. As far as Washington goes, like the backcourt, Wall's a little expensive, but we've seen the upside. Bradley Beal continues to be my favorite points per dollar value play. Or not value, but points per dollar play from this Washington team, especially in regards to the shooting position alone. This is a guy who's just been shooting lights out from the field of late, and still at a not a bad price tag. I mean, he's averaging 26, 3, and 3, shooting 52% over his last 6 games. You look at the Kings, I mean, god awful against shooting guards, allowing the 3rd most fantasy points per game. As far as the rest of these guys go, I mean, Markieff Morris, GPP only, Otto Porter, GPP only. The Gortat situation, and we've seen him really fall off the table of late. I mean, I'd rather use a Miles Turner, Clint Capella. I know Gortat coming off a strong game against Denver, but his minutes were trained down kind of all over the place. It is a decent spot. Sacramento 24th. And rebounding, obviously losing Cousins hurts. And we've seen Mahimi even come in and play some decent minutes, especially that game against Phoenix. Played 20 the game before, but 7 steals. That's not happening again. There's no reason to chase those type of points. Bogdanovic, as always, GPP play off the bench, good usage. When that shot's falling, we've seen him be, a decent ceiling guy. When we saw 41 against Phoenix, 34 against Orlando. This is certainly a spot where he can do that for, because you look at the matchup, they're in the bottom half in opponent field goal percentage allowed, especially behind the arc. And that's something where Bogdan can really get through with that one. As far as the Kings side of things go, they're always just a GPP team right now. Willie Cauley-Stein joined the starter power forward. I do like him in tournaments. Wizards do struggle against the 4 quite a bit. Lawson and Collison, just GPP toss-ups right now. I'd probably lean more on Lawson right now. Collison hasn't really shown that great of a ceiling. We've seen Lawson come out with a couple decent performances, but we've also seen the duds as well. But you look at Lawson, I mean, 30 fantasy points in 3 of the last 4 on DraftKings, above 25 on FanDuel, just because the turnovers do knock him down a bit. But on the cheaper side as well, so I don't mind taking some shots there. A good night to a late night hammer with some of these teams. Washington, Sacramento, a good one. Boston, Denver as well. The games that I'm probably just the least on as far as teams go will probably be that Toronto-Atlanta game and obviously the Brooklyn side of things. So, but overall, I mean, 8-game slate, everyone's pretty much in play here. So that's going to wrap things up. Be sure to head on over to DaveFantasyCafe.com, check out our great tools and content.